All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We are here today with Jeff Clark and Lee Wilder to talk about singing with style and how do you tackle different genres of music successfully in show choir and just choral music in general. So this is going to be a really fun conversation. For those of you who don't know, Jeff's a longtime show choir director he's still teaching, but he's sort of transitioned into more of a judge clinician role. And then Lee, of course, was working with Beat in Indiana and does a lot of freelance choral clinicking as well. So two people who really know their stuff and get to see a lot of what's happening nationwide in show choir, which I think is a really helpful perspective to have. So let's just kind of ease into it. When you have a new piece of music and you're deciding how you're going to teach it and you're preparing, like what's your thought process? Like, how do you decide, like, here are the stylistic things I'm going to introduce, and how do you decide the rules and like the best way to present them? Just kind of what's your general, like, before you get into rehearsal, just your preparation, what's that like? Jeff, why don't we start with you?
Yeah. So I think the most important thing is, it actually goes a step before that, I think, in my opinion, and that is the piece you're choosing. What's the goal you have for the group or for that choir? And again, before you even get there, it's kind of something where we want to set up our students for success, and we want to make sure it's something that's going to be educational for them. I think it's really important to, of course, expose a lot of styles. But I think we have to first go back to, like, is this piece of repertoire good for the students, for the choir, and then see what can be taught from that. And then a lot of times I feel like when I'm out there working and with groups and I see what's out there, a lot of times if I'm judging a show choir or something, I go back and it's like, gosh, the kids are doing some things there, but it kind of goes back to, like, but what was the director thinking with this? Because in my opinion, it's the style part of it that sometimes, as we're going to be talking about, I think it's important for us to know as directors that the piece itself will speak to you in its own unique way. But I think the composer or the artist, whoever actually initially envisioned the work, what were they thinking? And so again, when it comes to style, it's knowing, again, the genre, it's knowing the idiom, it's knowing the people who probably represent that genre, that style, the idiom, and knowing a little bit about it on the front end of things. I feel like sometimes, and I'm sure Lee will agree, like, if we see groups out there, it's like, this is great, I wish we could have gone from this kind of tonal concept, or from this kind of, if we could go from this way, and we are always like, well, it's kind of going back in time, and we wish we could kind of start over again. So I think it's important that as a director, we look, why was the piece, why are you choosing the piece, and what's it going to show the students, and how then are we going to best represent that via knowing the style, knowing the recordings. I'm sure Lee's going to talk more about the jazz background with her, but, like, can you listen to something like, the New York Voices or, Gold Company, and actually be like, hey, I know what that sounds like, I know how to mimic that, and how we can use the voice to produce that sound, rather than I pick a piece I like that I think is fun for the kids, or I'm just going to start teaching it and start doing E, A, A, O, U, vowel shaping and warm ups, and just hope that that's going to be making the piece come to life. I think that the style part of it, we kind of have to do our homework on the front end.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. All of the homework on the front end on the style part of it. For me, Garrett, when I go into the preparation, like, I love that Jeff went to the place where, what are we going to do with this piece? Who is this piece for? Like, who are my actual kids? As much as I know them, what do their strengths and weaknesses tend to be? How will I find messages that we can live in for a long time that actually encourage and engage them? And yes, I want to keep growing them, but I also want to find pieces that, like, fit their strengths so that we're not going to battle against it the whole time. Sometimes I think people will come up with a concept and their kids have to fit into the concept instead of the concept fitting the kids and the group. And maybe sometimes you don't have the luxury of that, but if you do, it's an immediate connection point. And then from that point, knowing maybe the personality of those kids, trying to find, like, things that speak to me so that that connection is tangible to them. The excitement and like the true emotional content pulls us all into that. So we want to get into the nitty gritty of how to make it beautiful and how to make it unified and breaking down every sound of every syllable of every word, because you hear in that artist that you're asking them to then invest in. Like, this artist is wonderful. India Ari. I want you to listen to India Ari. The depth and beauty of her tone, the soulfulness. I want you to hear how she moves through every word that she's written that makes you like feel that story from her and then want to live in it and sing it with her. So, I think that homework that Jeff is talking about is like, let's pick artists that we know have a sound technical background, including in popular music and jazz music, because there are artists that sing that with better technique and that don't. And we as educators have to be able to articulate, listen, Adele is amazing. I love Adele's soulfulness in her storytelling. There are issues in her technique that we need to be mindful of, that like along the way, they asked her to do more singing than her body could keep up with. And so now when you hear that, I want you to know that that's beautiful, but that's also not exactly what we're trying to emulate. It's not that those people are off limits, but it's that we need to really be able to understand and convey to the kids what that strength and weakness looks like, and be able to break down not just you should sound like this, but why should you sound like this? How do you get to that place? How do you understand the language? How do we fine tune it together? So and so that my preparation, I think, starts there. Like, how do we emotionally connect so that then all of the technical aspects of tone production and storytelling come to life,
Yeah. So when you're teaching, is this something you introduce along with notes and rhythms and all that stuff? Or do you kind of figure out the parts and then try to apply the style after the fact?
I'm a really huge believer in teaching every phrase as you want them to sing it from the time that you teach it, because otherwise you are doubling the amount of time you spend on it, and they have spent so much time technically singing it in a way that is incorrect, right? If it doesn't have the right expression, if you can't find the target words of the message, but you got all of the notes and the rhythms right, that is a lot of undoing to do to then later on in the process introduce the thing that really matters the most, which is, sort of the musicality of it. So I would rather go slower and be very intentional, which means that I have to do all my homework up front. I can't just put notes in you and come back and be like, okay, now here's what we're going to do, because that will probably make my job twice as hard. But it also means that we probably spend 2 or 3 weeks singing robotics instead of actual music, so for me, it is really about planning out the interpretation as I'm teaching the notes.
I would agree. I definitely think we're in kind of the mentality in the education world right now with music education that we want students to be, especially with the pandemic thing, like, hey, can they do this on their own? How can we get them to do these things on their own? And I think that's wonderful. I just think that there's a huge benefit to the modeling aspect. There's so many times we talk about syllabic stress, or I talk about syllabic stress when I see choirs, and to have someone like Lee who could, like, as a director of mine, who can say, this is how I want you to do it. And yes, we want them to be able to sight read. We want them to do the notes and rhythms and do these things. But sometimes even just the speaking of that, just like we would do if we were teaching a choral piece in a foreign language, we would do the same thing. So although, we're singing in English, we're so used to the pop tunes being in English, sometimes it would be great to have that from the get-go, and talking through those phrases and where are those important beats or those important syllabic stress moments to really bring, again, I think just the depth of the piece to life. And again, to go back to what the artist intended, yes, you can listen to it a lot, but the model of what that director wants, because yes, you want to make it your own. And as Lee said too, like, we have, I think, a lot of young people today, they have the TikToks, and they have the people who's the latest artist that they want to listen. That's what they see as, oh, they're getting the cheers, they're getting all the woo, woo, woo. And we're listening, and sometimes we're like, oh, and so we have to try to, like, translate that down a little bit and say, okay, we're going to make you be your own version of this, your unique version of this, and not necessarily just be a copycat. And by doing this, we could try like this and then demonstrate this phrase, that phrase. And I think that modeling part just goes such a long way. We can still be the independent musicianship people, but the modeling part of the director is so important. And then again, going back doing the homework so the director's ready to do it and not having to undo all the stuff later on.
So do you think telling kids to imitate artists is a successful way of teaching it, or does that lead to more like undoing you have to do later on? Like can it be sort of self-directed in that way? Like go home and listen to this artist and like experiment and like try to sound like them, or is that going to lead them to do unhealthy things?
Well, I think that that's, you know, if that's your if that's your philosophy, then you have to choose healthy people, you know. And I don't think that there's anything particularly wrong about that. Uh, And at a certain level, I definitely think that it can be really a great tool for a young musician and a young vocalist. It's like you can't be great until you have studied a lot of great people, until you have gotten on the inside of how they do what they do. But we also have to teach independent technique and foundation. I think before that a little bit, like make sure that they, you know, a little bit or a lot of it, you know, but to make sure that that they do get a sense of their own voice, of the things that they're capable of, that maybe listening to somebody would be a wonderful aid, but maybe there are things that they're not able to accomplish in their range or at their age, you know, or with their experience. So it definitely behooves us as the you know, the guider and the teacher to be able to tell them, you know, this is a voice that I want you to understand very well, and to really to listen to and hear this, but this isn't a voice that you're going to be able to imitate because you're 12 and they are not, right? But here's what we can take away from it, right? Here's what we can take away from it. You can use that kind of style, but you're not going to sound the same as them, but it's going to give us a great place to learn how this, you know, to learn how this inflection makes this word and this style special, you know? So I'm a big fan of imitation when applied correctly to the correct kids once they have, you know, once they have some understanding of what it is they are listening to, and once they've developed their own sensibilities.
I think it's a great thing too to like have that artist, you know, if you have that song by that particular artist, you know, and again, sometimes it is, if it's something that's current, maybe the students already know it. But if you're going back a little bit and it's amazing, you know, as we keep getting these gray hairs, it's like, oh my gosh, you don't know that song? Are you kidding me? Everyone has to know that song. And then they're like, what is the song? Oh, you know, and maybe sometimes show them a different piece by that same artist and not have them hear the song that you're going to be teaching. And then like, what do you think of this? And like a little bit of time for them to kind of already self-digest a little bit of that is kind of a way to, before we spring into the piece, or a contemporary artist or somebody in that same genre a little bit, and kind of, again, it's that front loading a little bit of getting them into that thing. Oh, this is kind of cool. There's so many times where the students are like, oh, I had no idea that existed, and then they, you know, buy into it. And that's so great for, you know, us music teachers. It's win-win, because it's like, oh, you're getting out of the music you hear all the time, and you're trying this, you're trying that style. And then again, we can temper it and say, but we got to know our own limits. And we're obviously not going to be that 32-year-old singer on the album. We're going to be, or that band that's, you know, hardcore, you know, heavy metal stuff or whatever, depending on what the style is. But like we're going to be able to do it in a certain way that works for us. And I think that, again, pushing that individuality piece, that we're going to make it our own, but we're going to take those pieces with it. So I think demonstrating by having them hear the singer or a contemporary of them is good. But I wouldn't necessarily be the one to say we must sound just like this, because that I think could also lead to some problems.
You know, it's interesting hearing you guys talk about this, because I've had directors, for example, tell me like when girls come into audition for choir, like everyone thinks they're an alto because the music they're singing along to, like what's cool right now is all that sort of like low spoken belty stuff. Yeah. And so like finding the right models for people, and maybe even finding the models like for each voice part, like, okay, you're a tenor, like this is what a tenor is supposed to sound like, you know, and figuring out healthy models, I think is really a useful idea. This may not be a really helpful distinction, but how much of style do you think is like the musicality of it and the way you're expressing the words and the phrasing and that sort of thing, and how much of it is actually like changing the way you produce the sound, if that makes sense? Like are you changing the tone quality more, or is it more about the expression? And I know that's going to be different depending on the style, but maybe just, do you have any thoughts on that kind of balance?
Yeah, I would say that it does kind of go to both, in my opinion, because I think sometimes some people go, some choir directors do sometimes go off the deep end with trying to make something so contrived to make it fit whatever that is. And I think we have to go back to, again, go back to the text, go back to the message at hand, and say, what are we trying to go for here? And obviously, depending on the vowel shaping, the diphthong, whatever, again, depending on the style of the music, we have to kind of temper both. We have to say, yes, there's a placement for that. And, again, I go back to the choral directors that teach, mi, me, ma, mo, mu, and they always do those same kind of warm-ups without ever realizing, okay, well, this time, then they go into often do a pop tune where it's more in the mask and something that's got forward placement and resonance to it. And then they're like, why are they not singing like that? Well, they're so used to being, such great, well-trained choral people that they don't think about using that part. So I think there's a bit of that and trying to find where that focus of tone is. But then there's also the part of, based on the lyrics, based on what that is, the composer's intentions, how do we make that fit? Again, you can't take that choral piece and put it in pop thing. It's cool. You see like, the postmodern jukebox, groups that take a pop tune and then do it in the swing style or do it in a slow jazz. And it's like, it's cool the way they manipulate that, but again, in a show choir world, especially with young voices, I think we have to be aware of the musicianship along the way, that it's not just we contrive to get the tone. I think we have to look at all sorts of things. Again, rhythm too, and just the patter of it and the way it's been out there. And I think we have to go along with that in the musicianship too. I think they kind of go hand in hand, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. The place that I start first, I think, when we're talking about how to integrate style into the choir is, as a vocalist, my instrument is my body, and I have to figure out where it's going to resonate and what is appropriate for that style. Where is the resonation of that style? For a gospel choir, it might be wider, and it may sit just a little bit lower, more towards my molars than in my mask. It may have, less ping to it, but still spin to it, right? So I want to talk with my kids after, and perhaps this is an opportunity for us to all listen together to a couple of different choirs or to a couple of different versions of a recording to talk about the things that we think are inherent to that style, like the sound. Then we would talk about where we feel that, so that we're starting off in a place where we're all aware that this is going to be, we're going to feel this in our masks, but we really want this wide in our masks. We don't want this like super bright, because that's not going to sound good with all of us, even though we might hear that in the recording, and that might be appropriate for the solo artist. Then we're going to break down, okay, what kind of enunciation takes place here? Is this do you hear like a classical choral influence in the vowel sounds, or do you hear a wider vowel palette? Does this sound super colloquial, and can you understand it? Do you think if we all did it together that way? So how do we have to modify it as a choir to be authentic and true to Beyonce, but to make it clear and articulated to our audience? So we can have that discussion and modify it together while trying to be like authentic and respectful of that music. We still have to like kind of find our choral way through it, but not without always like referencing where did we come from and what and how did we get here and what are we doing to make that possible.
Is there anything that should just never change? Like, are there rules of singing that you would just say, don't ever break these, like no matter what the style? Or
always breathe.
I would say breath. I literally was going to say breath support. We're on the same line. I'm like, well, you have to breathe. You have to create tone. But I think it's kind of putting out, I like to call it like the different surround sound speakers. It's like, what speaker are you sending it through? And especially, as we go up in our range and finding where that shift is in our range. And I think that sometimes that we have students that sometimes will hear, let's say, a country tune, and they just automatically assume it must be really bright and it must be really twang. And you can find, again, there's so many different shades to that I think a lot of times a lot of young voices will just gravitate towards the extreme. If you say we're going to sing something opera, they're going to start hooting all over the place and doing stuff. It's like that isn't just that they think that's what it is, and we have to say, okay, but let's put it in the context of, again, whether if it's on our show choir show or our concert choir thing, you would sing it probably differently for the concert choir thing than the show choir stuff, and pop diction, and how you're not going to do certain things with the interconsonants, and there's just all those different elements that, again, if you're depending on the context you're putting it in, the breathing, the fundamental stuff of breathing and just tone production, I think, is important. But I do think there's so much with vowel shaping and so much else that just changes based on that style. And I think a lot of directors go to college and they just get the usual stuff from their concert choirs in college, and that's what it is. And they don't have a lot of the pop or the show aspect being taught, or jazz or commercial music stylings. So they don't really get a chance to really work with that with the young people. And we have a lot of those people out there, I think, that just, it's a one done thing. Well, we do our normal vowels, and that's how we sing. And that's good singing, and that's mature tone, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
I would definitely, there is no substitute for learning excellent breath technique and healthy choral resonance. And I think that those fundamentals always serve you well and allow you to have the tonal flexibility that gives you a wide range of experiences as an ensemble, and so the hardest part, I think, of being a pop or jazz choral musician is that not all of the artists that sing this music have the benefit of technical training, and that doesn't make them less, less relevant or less heroic in the eyes of the kids. But it does mean that they are starting out without a foundation, and it's really hard to ask them to take that step back from, like, but I can already hear it, so I can sing it, to invest the time in making sure that they have some kind of concept of breath connection. But you just can't really be ultimately successful and ultimately have longevity without it. So I think that step is always worthwhile. And I've started it earlier and earlier with my kids. Now when I see the baby nuggets, we spend a lot more time breathing because there's so much emotional and musical excitement in the big kids that they want to go to that place already. So if it's not built into them when they're littler, you're like missing a big opportunity for their success. So, I think that that's always got to be in place.
Yeah. So, I mean, most of the people watching this are probably show choir people, but my guess is that their education is primarily, choral or concert literature. And so this is getting a little deep and philosophical, I guess, but, there's different styles of music within, classical lit and choral lit. And I'm wondering if there's a distinction between sort of that kind of music, which is, there's different styles of music that was intended for choirs, right? You've got vocal jazz, you've got, you've got Handel, you've got Bach, you've got Eric Whitacre, like you've got all these different types of music, but they were written with choirs in mind. Is there a difference between preparing that kind of music and learning music that was originally like a solo artist, but arranged for choir, or some other outside genre that was then taken and adapted to choral singing? Or is it all the same? Is style just style, no matter where it comes from historically?
I think it goes back to as someone like yourself who's an arranger. I think sometimes it goes back because of the arrangers I've worked with Lee's charts. I've worked with your charts before with groups I've worked with, and it's like I think every arranger has their unique style that they bring to, especially if it is a pop tune or something that is a little more of a commercial modern type of thing. And you can sometimes tell in their writing, and you can kind of see those patterns in the things that they do. And I think there are some of those arrangers that have a bit more of the stacked kind of stuff, and you'll see the way they do the sonorities, and you can kind of, with their voice voice leading, and you can see how, okay, that's definitely that kind of motif there really fits into this type of choral style. And then others, it's like, well, this is definitely, oh, they're closer clusters that, oh, that's a little more of a again, whether it's Whitaker or a vocal jazz, or like depending on the chord structure, and if it's really crazy and intricate, like I think you can see how that plays a role, and then you can almost literally overlap that into the choral world. I think a lot of times with the pop tunes that we see in show choir, if we just went into just a general, for the purpose of the discussion, a general pop, piece that's written for a show choir, I think that a lot of times, of course, the emphasis on the melody. I think a lot of times, sometimes with the groups that I see, I'm always like, where is the melody? And we need to make sure that that's prominent. Sometimes it can get buried in the texture of things, and that's not, again, not necessarily the arranger's fault or the singer's fault. It's just sometimes we lose track of that, and we're always working on, well, we have fewer tenors and basses, or we have fewer altos, or obviously with the world we're in now. So when these people are out sick and the blocking's off, so we're more worried about that. But we didn't realize that took some of the sound from the alto section away. So we're worried about fixing that. And then all of a sudden, well, if the alto had the melody there, we lose that. We have to go back and look at those things. Making sure in the pop tunes in general, is the melody present? Where are the harmonies? And then always making sure the students know your foreground or your background. I think sometimes, you'll have that one person sing out, and then you have the guys might have a solo line that's unison, and the girls have an ooh or an ah background, and the girls are just, wall of sound covering the guy's sound. It's like, no, they're the ones that need to be heard here. And again, depending on the arrangement, it might shift, but we have to go back and just say, and start talking, and make sure, again, through the literacy of the music and the sheet music, show the students, do you see here, there's that line that you have, oh, then you pass it off to this person. And I think you can analyze it for yourself, and it does change. And that goes with choral music of the centuries too. So I think you do have to treat it in a similar vein, and you still have to deconstruct it.
And the idea that, popular music all falls under one umbrella, like, absolutely not. Broadway doesn't fall under one umbrella, and Broadway is Broadway. So I'm always looking for arrangements and arrangers that I feel have some kind of connection to singability and singing, and like understand how voices have to open, and what words are worth sustaining and what words are not. And because there are a lot of wonderful arrangers that their instrumental prowess, I think, plays into the effectiveness of the arranger, or of the arrangement, but with voices. And it can be musically effective, but sometimes not vocally healthy to do that. And so like, you're trying to figure out or we take all of pop music and sort of put it into a formula that plays big on the stage for a show choir show, but it isn't actually necessarily true to the song, or like the intention of the style. So those are two separate things. I may want to teach my kids about the style, and like where that style comes from, and how that artist arrives at telling a story that way. But I could be a different director that is like, well, I love these lyrics and these chord changes make this fit into my show, and what I need right here is to smack the audience upside the head. That's not wrong. It's just a different philosophy, But within that, I think for sure in popular music, we have to be able to differentiate, and want to be able to help our students understand all of the beautiful intricacies that make each style really unique, and let them have that experience in their voices, in their bodies, in their culture, and what they understand about culture and other people, and history because of that. And so for sure, in the same way that we can go through all of the eras of classical music in general, not breaking it down into the eras that umbrella covers, we can do the same thing in popular music, and even more so because we're living in it. And you press on the iTunes button and 1,000 different genres come up, and you're like, cool so like, and that is cool, and I think it's important to like embrace that, even though it's wonderful also to be able to reimagine things and maybe put it in a different context as needed.
So when you're rehearsing, how do you train your students to shift gears? How do you get them to, if you're spending 5 minutes on, a pop song, and then maybe the next number in your show is a jazz number, or maybe it's a crazy mashup and you're going from style to style to style. Like, how do you teach those sort of gear shifts to be able to make those adjustments, quickly, and maybe without having like the warm-up prep that we talked about for it?
A lot of times I'll have a key word for each song. I'll ask them, like, can you give me one word that you think encapsulates this song? And if we have to do a quick change, and it's not built into our bodies, do you know what I mean? At a certain point, like, all of that becomes built in, but maybe it's these trigger words that, like, allow us to set them up. And maybe we say that word in such a way as it sets up the style that we want to come out of it.
Hmm.
uh, if it's a if it's a gospel tune or something, we're doing Kirk Franklin, and we'll be, and maybe the way that they would say that word is like soul, and we would make sure it's like a long O that has like reaches up, so that they would get, okay, reset, and in that one breath, hopefully that would remind them of some of the things that we're looking for. A tall vowel on the inside that stretches up. We're not creating space like with our jaw in gospel. We're actually like trying to keep, a more like a comfortable articulation that has like a street articulation to it, but we sure are creating a lot of space and a lot of forward momentum. So just trying to give them that trigger word to psh, got it, we're there.
Yeah, I think sometimes too the music itself or the instrumental, I know within the times with competitive show choir, sometimes just that initial, drum, kicking the drum off in that new style, or the horns take over, and just knowing that. And again, goes back to the arrangement sometimes too. It's like, how is the arrangement, how is the music speaking to you as to what that's going to do? So in addition to have like a keyword like Lee said, I think sometimes you get the students to be better listeners, to be like, oh, and then you sense that, oh, and there's the change. And it just like how we get goosebumps when we listen to our favorite kind of music, there's that same kind of sensation, like, now we feel this and then we feel this. And I think sometimes in the programming, this goes back to probably another webinars of yours, Garrett's, but like you can, like, in the programming of your show, try to make sure then that the style, I think it's really important that show and pop ensembles have a lot of variation of style. I think it's really important too that the directors again kind of can show the multifacets of their students. And of course, if they have something they do really, really well, great, focus on that. But in order to really showcase their versatility as performers, it goes back to the show design part. And I think, with the arrangers and working with the directors, how are you going to set that up? And it's just, setting up for a tennis match. It's the same thing. Are you going to help your partner out to get that happening? And it really can work over time. And that really showcases, the more you do that and the more the director is saying, no, let's stop, let's try that again. Did you really get as far as you could? Did you really change the style? And I couldn't hear a difference. Did you guys hear a difference? No, we couldn't hear a difference. Okay, let's do it again. And I think sometimes you just have to keep going back there, because it's a lot of times, we just look at the clock like, hey, rehearsal clock's ticking. We're just gonna sing. Can we just sing it again? And instead of really going back, like, oh, well, why would we sing it again? What are we going to change this time? And I think a lot of directors sometimes can get in that, kind of pattern a lot.
So how do you know if you've gone far enough? How do you know if if you need to lean more into the style, or how do you know you've reached a sort of acceptable level of authenticity, especially if it's something that you're not deeply familiar with? I mean, you may have done the homework into gospel singing, but if that's not something you're truly familiar with, like, how do you know, like, okay, we got it, we figured it out, like, this is what we want it to sound like?
Yeah.
You listen back to a recording of yourself singing it, and then you listen to Kirk Franklin's choir singing it. Do you know what I mean? Like, in essence, I think that you probably, and YouTube, hooray! There are so many amazing choral covers, even of small groups. Like, even if you're listening to a quartet or a quintet or something, but for real, you have to be able to listen to yourself and be able to recognize, is this giving us what Kirk Franklin is giving us? Or and you know what? And I'll say with my own groups, a lot of times we never even get there. I can tell you that we are not there yet, but, and we're going to keep moving towards that. But if we need to do a little check, how close are we to what we're modeling after? This is what we're going for. And always, I always want to start from a place of, but this is what you got. And I'm always going to find a place in an arrangement to make sure that they can nail some part of it. Like, that is where the imitation, it really comes in so clutch. And if you can find ways to have singable phrases, unison, like there's like just a sweet spot for unison where they can show off all the style that they've taken in from what they've listened to. Now, when we are moving into divisi, do we have the skill set like in each of our parts as an ensemble to keep that going? Well, that was so good. Why can't we do it here? Of course we can. We just need to elongate that vowel. We just need to lean into this word more, and that's going to give us the momentum that we need to put the placement where it needs to be to make it sound more authentic and like, the thing that we were listening to so much.
Yeah. And I would just literally say the same kind of thing. I think recordings are so important these days, and everyone's got a way to record something on their phone or whatnot. And I think that's so important. A lot of times with even, my groups now, it's like, I'll tell them, okay, phone's out, you're going to hold that up to your mouth and we're going to record yourself do this and then listen back. And you can kind of hear the background of what's happening around them, but they hear their voice. And then again, listening to or watching YouTube or hearing that style again somewhere else and keeping that part of the listening, or just say, hey, this week I want you to listen to this too. It's not the same artist we're singing, but it's something similar. Or you as a director can say, in order to kind of like drive that car that direction, like take them this way, and then have them hearing that a bit more. And again, also to kind of answer your question, I don't know if we're ever satisfied with what we do. I think we always want to go further. I mean, there's never been something I've done like that. It won't never get better than that. I'm like, oh, we could have still done this and we could have done this. Or it's the old, what we always want to stop and do it again. And choir directors never do anything without stopping. So it's like we want to stop and keep fixing. And I think that's something that goes back to, we as artists ourselves are always striving for what we see. Like when Lee hears that in her groups, or I hear it in my groups, we know what we hear and we know what we want. And we just have to keep striving for it. And I think a lot of times we're just kind of perfectionists and we know we're never going to get there, but we keep putting them down that path of, okay, have them listen to themselves more. And again, find ways that they can still continue to dive deeper into it.
So how does the size of the choir play into this? Does it change your approach at all if it's a smaller group versus a large group? I mean, what are there pros and cons to doing certain styles with larger groups versus smaller groups? Or how does that fit into your thought process?
I love lean and mean. I love lean and mean. I think it's really important for people, all humans, it doesn't matter what your age is, to be accountable to the process that you're investing yourself in. And nothing is better for that than a small group. I love large ensembles, and I do think that they have, given the right parameters, they should be as flexible and as able to perform with stylistic integrity and with agility as a small group. It's harder for the small group to create the kind of wall of sound that the big group. You can't really substitute for that volume or that intensity, perhaps, but you can definitely, I think, get really close with the individual commitment that you see, that you can, that it's very tangible. When 13 kids are on stage and they are all in and they're giving everything that they have, there's a certain charm about that, that can equal or, excel, 60 kids that are engaged, but not truly like enveloped, by that message and what they're sharing. So from a rehearsal standpoint, however many amazing people want to be in the room that can actually help the room. But I also, I also believe like if they're not helping the room, that doesn't actually make your choir better. So I don't think numbers is the name of the game, but I do think that, just in our little pre-conversation there, we talked about, that the pandemic has been hard on choir programs as far as like sheer numbers. But at least in my program, the kids that show up for rehearsal right now every day are absolutely delightful and in the most challenging time. They came out last year to like to dance in a parking lot in the heat and the cold because like we're in a very liberal community, which means it's very conservative in how we were dealing with everything at first. And to have those kids now be able to be in a room together and singing, like that was a revelation for us, especially at the beginning of the year. And so there have been some ways that they have owned that process maybe a lot more than some of the larger groups that I've had, and you're able to move a little bit faster in some ways. But the harder part now for my kids at least is that they haven't sung for a year. And so like building up the endurance and the muscle memory, the difference between every year of like your developmental change from 5th grade to 12th grade, and like the 7th graders going through puberty. Girls go through puberty and their voices change too. Do you know what I mean? We hear that very dramatically in boys, but it happens with girls too, where they can do something and then not have the ability to do it like the next year. And like what's happening, losing them at that time, helping them to grow through that's a little bit of a challenge. But I think the small group is like absolutely amazing and charming. But I think everybody has to be responsible for style, and I don't think it matters how many people are in the ensemble. Let's go.
Yeah.
I think the same thing. We look at the groups that we think of us, for small ensemble groups, or we think of going back to various, even a cappella, pentatonics or Manhattan Transfer, and you think of you can really pick out and we can individualize and hear exactly all those voices. If you have a choir of 60, yes, you're going to get that big sound. You're going to get there's a lot of elements to that I think you can't replicate with a small group. But it's kind of like if you think about herding sheep, it's like, yes, now we have all these sheep, and if the slightest one goes astray, we're bringing them all back in. And I think when you have that smaller ensemble, and I went from a very big school to a small school, so it was a bit of a shock for me initially to like, oh gosh, these are the numbers. Oh, now I'm hearing a lot of those individual things, mistakes or things that I know I can hone in on, which again, I think that's a nice benefit to having a smaller group. I think the big groups can still do all those things. I think sometimes the directors have to be a little more, put it back on the students, maybe the section leaders of, if you have an alto section of 20 girls, let's say, or, huge sections of people, it's like they're going to need to be more accountable of their group. And you kind of need a lot more people out there that can help the director, find those things and make sure you're creating that same tonal concept or locking in certain parts. And I think it just means you have to have a few more captains involved in the process when you have the large groups. So it's just the accountability piece might be a little higher. I think the accountability piece should be there for the small groups. I think sometimes it's just easier for the director or, them to probably find those little things and can tweak it more because there's fewer numbers to deal with. And it's just a matter of, and again, the advantages can both ways. There's advantages to both, either, large or small.
Yeah. So putting the whole dancing thing aside for a minute, are there things that you would teach or that you would have your kids sing differently in a show choir? Because it's a show choir, like if you took the same piano vocal arrangement of a pop tune, I don't know, Billy Joel, and you gave it to your chamber choir and your show choir, would you teach it in the same way, or or would you approach it differently because of like the kind of ensemble that it is? Like would a vocal jazz choir singing Billy Joel sing it the same way as a concert choir or a show choir? I guess like, does the genre of the choir affect the style that much, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think it depends. This is going to be very much a personal preference kind of thing. I know, for instance, if I am judging a concert choir at a competition and they try to do something that is going to be a little bit out of their way, if they've been doing, Whitaker, or they've been doing Mozart, and then they switch it up and do something totally different, I would expect that their tone, the thing they're going to do is going to change. But I do feel like sometimes they're a little bit encapsulated in that world a little bit more, that sometimes there's almost just this aesthetic already built into maybe the director as well as the students, that this is how we do this. I would prefer, I would say personally for me, and people probably will disagree, I would say for me, I think the best concert or show choir groups are the ones that when you close your eyes, whether they're moving or not, they're really locking that style, and it doesn't matter who's on stage singing they're creating that moment whether their feet are moving or not. And I think that's some of the things too with show choirs. There's so many that I think you go the concert choir route, and maybe it's same things the same with some concert choirs. Maybe some concert choirs, it's hard for them to get out of that sound that the director wants for their concert choral kind of tone and when they jump in and like, hey, this spring we're going to do a pop medley, and this pop medley is from In the Heights or something, and then all of a sudden, how do we change it like that? And they might have a more difficult way of doing it because it's just not what they've been used to. We're the product of what we have around us, and I think that sometimes goes back to what is the music you're surrounding the students with, and if they do have a lot of different stylistic variations that they're used to hearing, they can easily adapt it, whether they stand and sing or they dance it and sing it. But I do think you're going to run down the path. I think generally that they're going to have a different sound of that concert choir or that show choir, even though, in my opinion, they should be able to do both, whether they stand and sing or dance and sing.
Well, and you see that in show choir land too, right? I mean, I've seen groups work Whitaker into their show. I've seen groups singing, classical lit, Dies Irae or whatever happens to be, so it goes both ways. But I mean, I tend to agree with you that like the style is the style and you should teach it the same way. But I'm just wondering if there's certain sort of show choir rules or things that like show choirs need to do just because of what it is, because of the activity, if that makes sense.
I think rules like that are not helpful.
Good.
Just in that, like, there is no innovation if we conform to rules that don't serve us well, in growing with art. So if I'm going to be like super literal about the Billy Joel example, if you had a classical choir that sang "And So It Goes" with a beautiful classical tone, and you had a vocal jazz ensemble that sang it with this beautiful spread straight tone, I think both would be amazing, could be potentially amazing, because it's "And So It Goes." That piece of material lends itself to flexibility because it sounds actually as though it came from like a madrigal-like conception, even though he's a pop artist. But if they were going to do Piano Man and they sang it with a classical tone, I would not feel that I had been exposed to Billy Joel really, and maybe it's okay that it's not, but I also wouldn't feel like that was sort of a sincere expression, I think, of that like lyric, or even more than that, something that was like rhythmically induced, because I think that that's the place where even if you take out the dancing, the classical choir struggles to have like a groove oriented kind of success with me unless they're doing world music. And then sometimes we're really reliant upon the instrumentals, but we as vocalists in the classical choir are, it is a different kind of shift to sit into the authentic grooves of different world musics, and so I think that that's something that like a show choir, a vocal jazz ensemble, both of those things that are centered in popular music, musical theater, it's all based on dance music, right? At some point it was all groove oriented. That doesn't mean that doesn't discount the ballads, but it means that we have to have an inherent physicality connected to it. And so should classical music, in my opinion. Anything that has to do with your body, singing wise, should have physicality to it. But in classical music, we don't express it, as part of like our performance. But in any kind of popular music, we should, because that was the foundation of how it's built. Even if we're not moving, we have to have like the connection and the understanding of the underlying groove. And like if my babies don't understand the groove, I have absolutely not done my job, because like babies, that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing. And we'll make the choreography like work around your ability to be like take in that groove and actually actually be really, really authentic to it. So
Yeah, I really like that. And the thought of how, like, it's not just the style or the artist, but it's also the song itself, you know, because you have a lot of artists that either cross genres or just write differently depending on who they're writing with, or, you know, maybe they're trying new things for a new album. So you can't just slap a label on it and say, you know, Billy Joel sounds this way or Taylor Swift sounds this way. Like, there's a lot more that goes into it. So I really like that.
and I loved Jacob Collier. I don't know if you,
Of
I'm
course.
sure you
Jacob's
guys are. I
amazing.
mean, there it is. Do you know what I mean? He
Yeah.
is a musician that truly, actually, you know, he exhibits all of the understanding of sort of the broad range of music, and isn't that delightful? You know, that we can delight in all of it, and you
Yeah.
have like an example of a young person, you know, that you can kind of guide the kids to be like, listen to all of his albums
Yeah.
because they're so diverse and amazing, you know.
And
Yeah.
there's so much of that today that I think with out there in the media, and there's so many things you can find, again, going down those YouTube rabbit holes of stuff. And again, we live in a world where I know with us, I'm like, when I was younger, I wish I could have had all this right there at my fingertips. And a Jacob Collier who can do all these, you know, various stylings and stuff. I think a lot of young artists today too, and a lot of our students themselves, they're more, you know, diverse with what they listen to. Yes, they might have their main thing they get into, but I think there's a lot of more openness right now because there is so many different styles, because they can see, you know,
Mm-hmm.
oh, a Taylor Swift or a Jacob Collier or someone who's gone through different things, and they can hear those different styles and not feel like they're restrained to something because that's what they feel must be the only true thing. And again, hopefully the director in front of them or the people who they work, who are their idols in life, hopefully they're not saying this is the only thing you must listen to. I think hopefully a lot of us are, you know, worldly about that, and they're exposed to so much these days. I think that in itself has made our job a lot easier.
Yeah. Um, do you have any specific like advice for show choir directors, things that you hear frequently or you have to comment on frequently in clinics, or even just personal soapboxes that, you know, things that you wish more choirs did? Any just sort of, let's just kind of open it up, like, hit me with some of your best material.
I always find it like so amazing when I ask if people have heard the original recordings and they haven't, and and I, but it is so much more often the case than I wish it ever would be. I don't understand in this world how that can be possible. So that definitely would be like a big soapbox for me. You can do anything so differently, and I love imagination. Rearrange the snot out of everything in the world, but know where it came from, and then why it serves you well to expand on it. You know, it can be expansive, it can be amazing to reconceive of something, but please give credit where credit was due, and then also understand the evolution of it, you know. So that, I think, would be a big soapbox for me, for sure.
All right.
I would say just know that not everything has to sound the same. If you look at that score sheet and you see blend and balance or tone quality, I think sometimes people think that they have to sing in a certain way to achieve high scores there. And I think that there are things, yes, blend and balance is important. And yes, the tone quality, I think there's a lot of that I think depending on what your tone quality is, it will affect that blend and balance part. And I think it'll because you're all shaping that same, you know, tonal concept, and that's going to be a byproduct, and it goes from one thing to the next, a domino effect. But there's also times where sometimes, because it's so ingrained, and again, I think I've said it several times tonight, like, because the concert mentality of choral singing is what the director always knew, they're going to go there. I think there was one year a group did My Prerogative, you know, Bobby Brown, and it was, you know, it's my prerogative, and they added, you know, extra vus and all these it's all these things. I'm like, okay, it's, you know, that's not, but that's the good tone. And I just feel as though when you hear those kind of things, it's like, okay, but let's not be contrived about it. But no, the stylings change too. If you're doing something that's, you know, Lin-Manuel Miranda, and doing something that has like a rap line or something, a spoken text, you can't just talk it down here, Manju. You have to have inflection, and the guys have to put it higher so that it actually travels and gets out there, and not just, ooh, it's a rap song, so we're just going to chant, chant, chant down here. We have to actually have those peaks and valleys and know that, again, we can take these things that we hear in pop culture today, and if we want to put it in a vocal ensemble that we have to make sure that we do shift those things from the original. I think, as Lee said, we want to listen to and honor the original artist, but then we have to make it work for who our audience is, who are our students we're teaching it to, and in their bodies and their voices. How do we make that happen? And again, from a show choir standpoint, at least competitively, you're trying to please a big panel of people, and I'd say forget about the panel of people that are out there when we're watching you. It's what's best for you, but again, do your homework, put the time and effort into it, because otherwise we're going to be like, well, did you really, I don't know if this is what you really intended. And then I think it's going to be a lot more of at least from a judging standpoint, we're going to be a little bit more of on top of your case about it, because you're sending us mixed signals, and the students too, because they don't know any better. Like Lee said, have you heard the original version? No. Well, and you can tell it's like there's a disconnect there. And I think that the investment of knowing that vocal tone style and what you're creating that for your ensembles is so important. And again, I hate to say it, but I blame the director. I blame the person who's picking the music if that's not there. And it's sad that I have to put a number on a page to do that, but it is a reflection sometimes more, I think, of what the director intended than the students.
Yeah.
And I think I would say, like, building off of what Jeff is saying, all the investment, listening isn't about listening for its own sake. It actually is getting back to the idea of when you ask a group of performers, and especially when we are teaching kids, what does this story mean? We're going to tell you all of these technical things, and here is the pathway through the notes that you tell your story. But what is the story? What are you trying to convey? And we are not clarinets. And the director, the conductor we don't get to feel like what the choir director in a show choir meant for us to feel. Mm-hmm. The vehicle and the point are those young people getting to own and stand in that story and having a healthy expression to do it. So like it is a little bit, I think, like we're missing a really valuable moment when you show up for a clinic and you're like, so what does this mean? And they all look at you like blankly, Don't get me wrong. I know sometimes it's just like where you are in the process. Like, oh, we just taught the notes. Why did we teach the notes before we taught what the words meant? Because that's the first vehicle they have to read. Do you know what I mean? Like at some point we have to acknowledge the reason for why we're going to sing this song, and then we're going to find our way through the style. So just making sure that like you are connected to the message of the song, so that every time you learn a new phrase and the notes that go with that phrase in that section, you're putting it in the context of how it furthers the story, and your narrative becomes more real to the judges, to the audience. It's the whole reason that we're up there. So like making sure that we get back to the reason for why we're doing this, and it's not just a vehicle for like, it's like doing push-ups where, okay, this is going to make you strong. Just make sure that you get these, get your calisthenics done, and then, then we can go play the game.
Right.
I think there's a little bit more to the game than that. What's the strategy of the game? What's the end game? Why are we here together? What makes us a team? And like making sure that we've got that piece of the puzzle to the performance, so that all the things that we put in place and why. Then you don't ever want to sing things contrived, because you're like, that doesn't make any sense in the context of this song. Why would we do that? That's not where that character is coming from. So I think it takes some of the step away. We're making some weird musical decisions that don't have to do with, what this story tells us. Perhaps it can be, informative in that way. I don't know.
Yeah. All right, final question. Let's reward everybody who watched all the way to the end. Do you have a favorite like rehearsal trick or activity or device that you like to use when you're teaching the style of any particular kind of song, but just a favorite thing to do to get something into their heads?
That's a tough one. I think it depends on the song style. I would say like I don't have like one go-to thing that I would do. I think it depends on what that song style is that we're going for. I'm gonna steal something from Lee, just because I feel like, in my time working with Lee, like I think sometimes with like if it's a straight tone or maybe a vocal jazz kind of thing, of singing through that smile and always having that smile there, and realizing, and again, of course, vocal jazz, we know, imitating instruments a lot, but I think that's something that for me, I always go back to Lee telling me years ago, like, okay, we're singing through that smile. All right, y'all, we're singing through that smile. And I can always I can hear that in my head. I hear you, Lee. And it's like those little things. And I think we're a product of who we're around. So my years of working with amazing people, you kind of take those things, but I think you always apply it when needed, and not necessarily a catch-all this or that. I think, and that's, that could go through and be like, oh, this warm up works for this, or this does this, but it's about the style. If I need to find something that's going to be more to bring the mask of the face and the sound, and do things, I'll have a warm up for that. If I'm trying to find something else that's, a different style, I'll go here. I think, again, one thing that I probably try to do more often than not is, again, the physicality part, and making sure that it's within the body. I think, keeping the movement going works so much. And I think that Dalcroze style of teaching is just it really helps with making sure the students feel that inner pulse, and again, subdivision, and finding ways to do that too. But yeah, I can't say there's just one trick. I mean, I could go on for a long time. It depends on what it is. What's the glossary? What's the problem? And we'll figure it out.
Oh my gosh, Jeff, that makes me so happy that you still keep that with you. I have no tricks, Garrett. I don't even know.
Oh, she does. She's got plenty of tricks.
His answer was one of your tricks. Come on.
I just gave her. I gave you her trick. I did.
Definitely physicality matters so much to me. We are never gonna be flat-footed. There's no time when you're not gonna be moving on that stage in show choir, and we will not sing flat-footed. So I'm constantly in motion, and I ask my kids to do that. Once we get beyond sort of the note teaching process, we'll sit and kind of like take that in. But after that, it has to be like full physical involvement. And honestly, I do a lot of sirens with them, just to remind them that they can keep things spinning and forward, and just how easy singing. I tell all my kids, singing is as easy as a siren, and we make it harder by not supporting the sound, or by putting it in places where it won't project easily. But we have to figure out like where the easy place is in our voice, and then we have to find ways to utilize that and modify what we want for that sound in a healthful way in the place that is the easiest for us. Because oh my gosh, we're gonna do all the hard stuff with the dancing anyway, so there's gonna be enough hard. So I guess I would say that is like, singing is as easy as a siren, and then just kind of getting them to that free place, and getting them to that like physically engaged place, and then hopefully that puts the smile in their eyes and the smile in the room, and we can have fun together.
All right. Well, thanks to both of you. This was really fun. Any final words of wisdom, or did we cover it all?
No, just keep having, just like keep being in the room with and appreciating that other humans came to be in the room with you. It's so hard right now. I mean, like every day I have a different kid, that has COVID, and God bless them. They have no good guidance on like, I don't know when I'm going to be back. And it's just like, keep breathing, baby. It's okay. And, but being in the room with them, they're going to remember the time that and the people that help them navigate this hard. And I always say to my kids, we have singing and dancing to help us navigate this. Can you imagine, like, if you didn't have that expression? No wonder people are so sad and so down, because like we have some expression and we still are trying to navigate this world, and we feel the heaviness, but we also can find some buoyancy together, so like I just hope that music is healing and helping everybody to kind of take, put one foot in front of the other every day. And thank you, Garrett, for, taking the time to just help encouraging people along the way, and giving them some additional tools maybe to reference when they're like, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, I think we just can't take things for granted. I think we know what it's like to be in a shut down world. And I think this is that outlet for so many young people, and for ourselves. Sometimes I feel like we need this as much as the students do, to have these outlets to get that going, get out there and be on that stage, or have the adrenaline rush. It's just, that's life. That's what we're here for. And I think that there's so many times that it becomes a work. It's like all about, well, we got to do this for the scores. We got to do this for the trophies. And it's like, no, we have to actually make sure that we're there for the right purposes. And when you lose that joy, then you're like, okay, this isn't joyful for you. Finding your joy, finding to do that. And again, having the opportunity to do this, and the fact that we can provide that for students now more than ever, it's just so important. And I hope that I know right now there's, some people worried about the teacher shortages of not just with, subs, but like just in the future with not as many people out there in music education programs. And it's something that really concerns me, because I'm like, this is what we need. And there's so many people like us probably that do what we do now because we love it so much. And there are so many of us out there that are 12-year-olds, 14, 15, 16, whatever. And they need that. And I think we have to keep on, fighting the good fight. And, when those stage lights come on, I mean, for those students, that's the thing I keep saying on my judges tapes. It's like, folks, the lights are on you right now. That warmth of the stage lights and getting that adrenaline rush, you can't do that at home, in front of your computer. Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of white light here, but like, the ring lights and stuff do not replicate what you actually have. We're all tired of those anyways. So it's just, I think there's things like that cannot truly replace what that unique live performance can bring. And we just have to be so thankful right now and keep pushing, because it's what people come to school for and it's what they live for.